One of the hardest things to do for a football club is to reinvent itself. Most clubs are decades, even centuries old. Institutions whose infrastructure often reflects the haphazard nature of their evolution. On top of this, the football calendar is so constant that it can feel like even the most basic changes a club makes are like trying to build a plane when it's already in the air. But it can happen. And for example, take Arsenal. At the end of the 2019-20 season, they had just finished 8th in the league. They'd appointed a rookie manager, and their backroom staff was completely different to what it is now. They also had an entirely different set of personnel at the board level. Fast forward 3 years, and they find themselves sitting at the top of the Premier League, at least at the halfway point of the season. A club reinvented and heading in the right direction. And across London, there is another famous football club also looking to reinvent themselves. Last summer, Chelsea were bought by American investor Todd Boehly. And since then, they've been able to make sweeping changes. So, could Chelsea be the next Arsenal? Now, firstly, it's important to note that Arsenal and Chelsea are two different clubs at two different junctures. But there are some fundamentals that all clubs need to succeed in the modern game. So let's have a look at 5 areas in which Arsenal were recently able to make changes which influenced their future direction. It's easy to ascribe most of Arsenal's recent success to Mikel Arteta. But it's important to remember that the success of the Spanish manager is as much down to the club's patience with him as his own coaching. After finishing 8th in his first half season, Arteta then only managed another 8th place finish in his first full season, before seeing his young side drop out of the Champions League spots in a late season collapse the following year. The lesson here is not that you should always give your manager more time, rather that if you're going to appoint a process manager, you need to support them with underlying infrastructure changes that allow them to succeed. One of those key underlying infrastructure changes was the change of sporting director. When Arteta arrived at the club in 2019, former Arsenal player Edu Gaspar had recently joined as the club's technical director. At that point, Raul Sanllehi was the club's director of football, but he left in 2020, being functionally replaced by Edu. With this shuffle around at the highest level, Arsenal were able to refresh a lot of their day-to-day operating processes to give them an advantage over their rivals. So, one area where those processes changed was in player acquisition. Previously, Arsenal had operated with a traditional scouting department, but in 2020, Edu announced that head of recruitment, Francis Kagigao, would be leaving the club as part of a wide-ranging review. In place of this more eyes-on approach, Edu announced the club's player acquisition would rely more heavily on StatDNA, the internal data and analytics company which Arsenal bought in 2014. The fruits of this shift are already being seen in Arsenal's more recent transfer activity. But of course, it wasn't just at the board level that Arsenal made changes. Soon after Arteta joined in 2019, it was announced that he was bringing in Steve Round and Albert Stuyvenberg as assistants, along with goalkeeping coach Iñaki Canapavon. The next summer, 3 more faces were brought in to bolster this group: Carlos Cuesta, Andreas Georgsson and Miguel Molina. Each of these assistants has a clear role behind the scenes. For example, Carlos Cuesta functions as an individual development coach for the Arsenal players. Fluent in 6 languages, he was often seen on the All or Nothing series acting as a mentor and counsellor to the players. And all of these 4 areas contributed to a more fundamental area of improvement: a culture change, which underpinned everything Arteta wanted to achieve at the club. Interestingly, this refresh of the culture at Arsenal was facilitated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which saw the football season curtailed for a little while, allowing Arteta to take the time to rethink how the employees of the club should approach their jobs. By the time football returned, Arteta was able to implement this cultural shift across the various elements of the club in order to unify the club and focus them as they look forward. And these 5 areas of improvement all played their part in the current success of the club. Of course, this is the sort of restructuring that Todd Boehly might want to see at Chelsea, and the American has already made sweeping changes since he took over. At the level of management, Boehly has followed the Arsenal model. By bringing in Graham Potter along with his backroom staff from Brighton, the Chelsea owner has committed the club to a long-term process of improvement similar to what happened at Arsenal under Arteta. And this, of course, is a brave new world for a club who adopted a much more short-term strategy in the past. Where Arsenal had to endure 2 8th-place finishes in a row and the disappointment of missing out on Champions League football under Arteta, it's likely that the Chelsea board and fan base might have to accept a similar fallow period for their club. Behind the scenes, a lot has already changed at Chelsea. Soon after Boehly arrived, Petr Cech, the club's technical and performance advisor, and Marina Granovskaya, the club's director, were moved on to be replaced by Lawrence Stewart from Monaco and Christopher Vivell from Leipzig. There have also been changes made at the level of player recruitment too, with the entire infrastructure of the scouting department being remodelled. When it comes to tearing things down then, Chelsea have adopted a very similar strategy to Arsenal. The big question is, will they oversee the rebuild process as well as their cross-city rivals? And this is where the final of our 5 areas becomes important: the culture change that Arteta oversaw. Because it was this aspect of the process that has given Arsenal the unity of purpose that has allowed them to succeed. With a clear sense of what everyone's role is and how it fits with the broader picture, the club have been able to make the step up to challenge for the Premier League title. If Chelsea are to do the same, they will also require a similarly considered cultural overhaul. If you like this video, please like and follow Tifo. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Daniel Taylor, Ollie Kay, Amy Lawrence and Rafa Honigstein. There are journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the post.